is not part of the deal. Okay. Got it. Okay, well, welcome to kind of the first revamping of the basic ham radio course. And we are going to talk about understanding and using our HTs. For extra credit, what does HT stand for? Handheld transceiver. Or handy talkie. Exactly. There's actually a bunch of names for it. Okay. Now, here's the rule for this session. If you have a question, then it will be horrible if you can't keep that question to yourself. Because if you have a question, someone else probably also has the same question. Okay. There is no such thing as a dumb question, just a dumb instructor. Okay, we need to make sure we understand this. So, also, well, I'll talk about that later. We are going to get on track here. We're going to talk about a bunch of basic stuff. The agenda for tonight is powering on our radio, VFO versus memory mode, changing channels or frequencies, changing transmit power on the fly, getting into the menu system. We're going to talk about repeaters and programming our radio so we can talk on a repeater. And we're going to talk about programming our VFO settings into a memory channel. So,
question.
Yes.
Some people may not know what the frequencies are.
We're going to talk about that. Very good. Okay. So the radios that I'm going to be demoing in particular are the Baofeng UV5R. And it turns out that the Baofeng radio, that particular model, also works for about 90 other models in the Baofeng family. Okay, so if you know it for the 5R, you'll know it for the UV8H, which is what I have here with the extended battery. This will last me all week long, but it's the firmware and everything is the same. All the internals are the same. So it will work. What I do on the UV5R will work on any of the Baofengs. Another radio that we're going to be going over is the Yaesu VX-6. It's a tri-bander. It does 3 bands. That's why it's tri. The 2 meter, 1.25 meter, and the 70 centimeter. Sometimes referred to as the 144 megahertz band, the 220 megahertz, and the 440 or 444, whatever.
Why do they have the different descriptions on those? Why isn't it just the meter instead of the megahertz?
Okay, that is next week's class. So just to answer your no, that's fine. Just to answer your question, anytime we refer to like the band of a ham radio band, there are two things that describe it. The actual length of the wave, which is the 2 meter part. So the 144 megahertz is actually about 6 feet long, a single wavelength. Okay, so that's why they call it 2 meter. It operates at 144 megahertz, or how many times the little squiggly line goes per second. 144 million cycles per second. Okay. And the 1.25 meter is just that. The wavelength of the frequency is 1.25 meters, whatever that is in feet. And the frequency is 222-ish. Okay. And these are, even with the HF band, the high frequency stuff that we learn when you get your general license, we talk about the 40 meter band and the 80 meter band, 160 meter band. Those are rounded up or rounded down numbers. Okay. They just describe the area of the ham radio bands that we're using. So each radio wave has a wavelength, how long the wave is, and has a frequency, how many times it does its jiggle dance per second. Okay, that is the frequency. So this one, the VX6 is the tri-bander. It does all three of those bands. We also will be talking about, sometimes I refer to myself as we, me, myself, and I. So the FT-60 is a dual band, so it does a 2 meter and the 70 centimeter, which is probably the most common type of HT that's out there. And then the other radio I'm going to be talking about is another tri-bander. It's a TYT 350. That is kind of what we have been using as a club. Some people are using the VX6. As far as quality goes, very, very good quality. But I'm not here to sell you a radio. Yes.
On the Baofeng, what band that?
It's 2 meter and 70 centimeter. There are Baofengs that are tri-banders, okay? But the one we're talking about is the dual band. And it makes no difference what if you have a tri-band or a dual band. What I'm going to talk about tonight applies to any radio, okay? Any of the Baofeng radios, okay? So let's talk about the hard stuff first. Get it over with. Powering on your radio. How do you do that? Well, with the UV5R, it's a simple twist of the only knob that it has. That is you turn it clockwise, and it's also used for volume. Okay. So as I'm doing this, I want you to go and try it out and make sure that your radio's power on. If you don't have a Baofeng, then don't power it on yet. We haven't gotten there yet. Okay. The next one is the VX6. The VX6 is a little bit different. It has the power on button. There's an orange button that actually has a power indicator that's really hard to see, but you have to push that orange button for a second for the power to come on. This is the only radio in our list that requires pushing a button. Now, I happen to bring my FT2D. It also has a power on button. So one of the things that you're going to realize is there's a lot of commonality amongst all the radios, okay? They just do things slightly differently, okay? So even if you have all of the radios like Sherwood has, it's not that big of a stretch to understand all your radios. You know, there's like the VX6 has a few little quirks that the Baofeng doesn't have, you know, and you just have to learn the differences, and it's no big deal. But after we talk about powering it on, when we talk about VFO and memory and all that stuff, every radio has a way of doing that. So let's continue on. The FT-60, the middle button, the middle dial is your power on and your volume control, okay? And last but not least, the 350, it's the outside button, outside dial. Turn it clockwise. That is also your volume control. Now you all get a mark for knowing how to turn your radio on. Now, let's talk about VFO mode and channel or memory mode. First of all, I know what memory channels are. Even GMRS has memory channels, but what the heck is a VFO? VFO? UFO? What? I don't understand. I mean, is it contagious? Am I going to get sick if I touch it? No, actually, VFO stands for Variable Frequency Oscillator. Now, Dan, you're not helping me any, because what the heck is a variable frequency oscillator? Okay, well, in layman's terms, it's a fancy way of telling you that you can input the frequency number in your radio. That's all there is to it. When you're in VFO mode, that means that you are not in channel mode, which means that you can use your keypad and type in any frequency that you want to listen to, okay? If you have a tri-bander, if you're typing in 223.960 and 0, and that number comes up on your display, that's the frequency that you're listening to. And by the way, if you do that, you'll be listening to the Murray Amateur Radio Club's 220 repeater. If you're, so it's whatever frequency you want to listen to. And there's a lot of radios that allow you to listen to frequencies that are outside of the band, outside of the ham bands. So the VX-6 and the FT-60, I can listen to even this here. I can listen to shortwave radio. I can listen to FM. I can listen to AM. I can listen to things that are completely out of band. And when I'm sorry? Aircraft. Yep. A lot of public service bands is a very common thing that people listen to. So anytime you're listening to something that is out of band, that means that it is not an official frequency that you are licensed to use. Okay. As a ham radio operator, just because your radio can receive the Salt Lake County UHP doesn't mean you can transmit and talk to Salt Lake County USP, unless, of course, you want to enjoy 3 squares a day. But that's totally up to you. Okay. And a $10,000 fine. Okay. You can listen. There is no restrictions on listening. Okay. So how do you engage your VFO mode on your radio? Well, for the UV5R, this is the only radio that is so very, very simple, because there's a button, an orange button that says VFO/MR. So if you push that, you cycle between the VFO mode, in other words, the mode where you can type in the frequency, and the MR mode, which Baofeng calls it channel mode. Okay, it's memory. It's your memory button. So memory channels is your MR, memory recall is MR, and VFO is VFO. For the 6, there's a little VM button in the lower right-hand corner of the keypad. You push that and you toggle back and forth. For the 60, the FT-60, there's also a VM button on the left-hand side of the keypad. You push that, and you know you're in VFO mode because, let me see if I can bring up my laser pointer. Okay, you know you're in VFO mode when you push the VM button or the VFO button on the Baofeng, and you can see that there's no channel number. If I go back a screen, you notice that there's no channel number here. When I go back a screen, this particular radio is in MR mode or channel mode, because you can see that there are channel numbers there. Okay. Incidentally, the Baofeng radio, as well as the TYT, they have multiple displays that show up. Okay, so in particular, we have the A band, which is the top band, and the B band is the bottom line. You're able to access either band at any one time, and to go between them, you have to click the AB button. So the AB button on a Baofeng is referring to the band, the line that you're looking at, the A band or the B band. Okay, and again, it's just toggling it back and forth. Yes.
That signifies like input frequency.
No. It is strictly what you're putting here is the receive frequency. Okay. We're going to get to the output frequency later on. Yes, Jan.
One thing to think about is that think of it like you have almost 2 radios in the one box, right? And so one is the A radio and one is the B radio. So you can decide which one you want to use. And go back to your Baofeng rating on that one, you can see, like on this one, the little arrow on the far left is pointing at that middle one. So that's the active one. So if you were to transmit, that's the one that would be transmitting. But it can actually receive on all of them.
And it can receive on all of them at the same time. Some radios will allow you to do that. There is a configuration in the radio that it can prohibit you from listening on all of the bands at the same time. That's confusing to some people, especially if you're doing a bike race or a marathon and you have 3 separate frequencies that you're listening to, and you're talking something and you hear something in your earpiece, and you look at your radio and they stop talking. Well, you don't know which band they received it on. Okay, some radios will tell you which band was just you just received the transmission on. Some radios won't. Okay, so it depends on the radio. Did you have a question?
Did actually, thank you.
Yeah.
So for APA-B band, I got like
Baofeng?
it has AB, that same thing as 1 and 2 then.
Those are the channels that each one of those is on. This little arrow over here tells you which one you're active on. Press it again.
So on the Baofeng, there's a little caret, shift 6, that is kind of an arrow pointing up. That is telling you that you are currently on the A band. If you push the AB button, then that arrow will come down to the bottom. Okay, now that arrow will play a very important role when we start getting into the menu structure. So you need to be aware. And not only the Baofeng, but you need to be aware of the TYT 350. In particular, now you have 3 bands to worry about, okay? So you need to make sure you know which band you're on. And it's very easy, you just look at it. And as you can see, this, even though I'm looking at the frequency, I'm in channel mode on this TYT because you can see the channel numbers there, okay? So if I were to click on the VM right now, this display would change to whatever frequency was there the last time I clicked on VFO for that band. This one has 3 bands. I'm looking at the center one. That number will disappear. Okay, let me know that I'm in VFO mode, or I'm able to then type in a frequency. Yes, Karen.
Okay, so these are really tiny numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I noticed they mark up when you change channels. Is there a way to keep the light on? Or
Some radios have that capability. Some radios do not. Okay.
so you just have to kind of toggle and get it on.
Right. Generally, what I do, if I have a radio that
Harder to see.
doesn't give me a choice, I always do the top button here. This is my channel selector, and I just go channel up, the channel down. So I just go one channel up and down, and then the light comes on, and I'm good. Yeah. Okay, so that's now let's talk about changing channels. Okay, we talked about channels. Well, let's talk about changing channels or frequencies. Now, we already know getting into the VFO, in order to change the frequency, you just get into VFO mode, and then you use your keypad to type in the frequency. Okay, and the radio will not let you type in a frequency that it does not understand. Okay, just because you have a ham radio doesn't mean you have access to all frequencies. Okay, that is radio dependent. As a matter of fact, if you type in 983 megahertz on the TYT, as soon as you type in 8, and you'll get a nasty beep saying, I don't like that frequency. So, okay, so let's talk about changing channels. For the Baofeng, any of the Baofengs, you make sure that you are in channel mode. Okay, this is changing channels. We're now going away from the VFO. We've clicked on the MR button, the VFO MR button. I know I'm in channel mode because the line that I'm looking at has the arrow. This arrow is pointing up. If I was down here on the B band, the arrow would be pointing down. The point of the matter is the arrow will be on the line that is active, okay? And as you can see, I have channel 3 right here on the top one. If I click on the up arrow, I'll go to channel 4 if something is programmed in channel 4. And if I click on the down arrow, I'll go down to channel 2. Okay. You can also type the channel number. You know, let's say you're in channel 3, like this picture has, and you want to go to channel 68. Well, you can, if you want, click on the up arrow until you get to 68, okay? Or on the Baofeng, it requires you to input 3 digits. So you would do 068. And as soon as you type in 068 on the Baofeng, this number, whatever channel is active, whatever band is active, will change to 68. Okay, so the Baofeng requires 3. Look, in my world, that's a 3, okay?
That's because there's 128 possibilities.
Thank you very much, Vern. It requires 3 because there's 128 channels, so that's 3 channels. If you just type 31, it's not going to do anything, okay? It's listening for three channels.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was putting the channel into the memory mode.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is assuming we're in memory mode. This is the only way you can change channels is if you're in memory mode. Okay. On the VX-6, in order to go into memory mode, you have to click the VM, and you know you're in memory mode because there'll be a channel number right there. And if it's labeled, it'll have some name there. So the frequency is not going to be there anymore. And then you can, as soon as you're in channel mode, you can go ahead and rotate this bottom rotated button or dial, and that will change the channel. Or you can type in a 3-digit number on the keypad. And how many channels does the VX-6 have? It has 1,000 channels. So putting the number is probably a good thing. If you know you want to go to 544, yes, you can go ahead and just click on 544. The net will be over. People will have gone to bed. The end of the world probably would have happened, and then you'll be able to talk to somebody who's not there because the end of the world happened, the zombie apocalypse, etc. Okay. You also come and visit my world sometime. It's pretty amazing. Okay, and then once you on the VX-6, once you enter in the 3 digits, then you have to push the VM button to tell the radio, I want that channel. So 544 VM, and then it'll take you to channel 544. For the FT-60, again, you have to be in channel mode. So you push the VM until you're in channel mode. Then you can turn the top dial. That's their channel selector. But how many channels does the FT-60 have? Keep going.
1,000.
Almost. It's like 750 or something like that. 800 channels. Anyway, it's a lot. Say again?
Memory location?
Memory locations, yeah. Right. Possible memory locations.
Yeah.
And if you've downloaded the standard load, and if you use my standard load, then you will have hundreds of repeaters in there because I have all the repeaters in Utah on that load. So you kind of have to know what channel to go. But it turns out people kind of use the same channels over and over, so they end up knowing, I know that the Murray Amateur Radio Club's frequency on Ensign Peak, I know that's on channel 28. I don't know if that's for sure, but I'm just giving you an example. And so you just do 028, hit the, on this one, in this case, you have to hit the FW. Now, the FW is a new key that we haven't talked about yet, and it's on the VX-6 as well as the FT-60. They're on Yaesu radios. FW, extra credit, means what? Anybody know?
Wide.
Say again?
Wide?
Wide? No. FW means frequency right. Okay, but don't write that down because there's only one instance where you actually use it to frequency right. There's a bunch of other uses that Yaesu uses the FW key. And so in this case, it's like the enter key, okay, on the 60. And on the TYT, you need to make sure you choose the correct band, make sure you're in channel mode, and then you can, again, push the up or down arrow. The TYT 350 also has 128 channels, so it requires a 3-digit number. You can also turn the middle dial to change the channels, okay? And consequently, if you're in channel 15 and you want to go to channel 120, well, just think a little bit here. I could either go all the way through 15, 16, 17, 120, or I can turn it the other way and go 15, 14, 13, 128, 127, 126, and then I get where you're at. So you can, it goes both ways, either channel up or channel down, okay? So you can do it that way or enter in the 3-digit number. And yep, there you go. Now, this is something that, yes, sir.
Just so I know I understand, a channel is basically a frequency, right?
Correct. A channel is a frequency that has been assigned a channel number. Okay.
Basically memory.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And with that memory, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about repeaters, there's lots that you can program into that, into the VFO. We're going to learn that in order to program something like a repeater into memory, make a channel out of it, you have to do the frequency. You have to understand what the offset is. So there's a transmit frequency and a receive frequency. You have to know what the frequency offset is. And if it's a repeater, chances are you need a PL tone. Okay. And we're gonna talk about that. Okay. And all of those things have to be correct in order for the repeater to talk back to you. Okay. So we're going to talk about that in the next section. But for right now, let's go to changing transmit power. There's an FCC rule, and I'm going to let anybody who knows what the rule is that talks about your transmission power. Our responsibility as ham radio licensees is to do what?
The lowest possible power.
Say again?
Just the lowest possible power.
Correct. Use the lowest possible power that enables proper communication, right? If you're using 300 milliwatts and I'm only catching every other syllable, I need to go a little bit higher, right? But if if I'm talking to, if I'm on a simplex channel, extra credit, what's simplex? Yes. Okay, so you are talking to somebody, you're not using a repeater, you're using the same transmit frequency as your receive frequency. That's called a simplex channel, okay? And if I'm talking to Sherwood and he's across the street and I'm using 5 watts, I really shouldn't be doing that because I'm also could be affecting somebody who is 5 miles away because they can also hear me. I should be using, if I'm using the VX-6, I should be using 300 milliwatts, you know, the lowest power, or 1 watt. Power low, whatever that is. Yes.
That's assuming straight line between the two. What if you've got a mountain in between the two of them?
That's called HF. Or actually, there's a lot of answers to that. Okay. If you're using a repeater, which is what the Salt Lake Valley has, we have tons of repeaters. A repeater is nothing more than a piece of equipment that is on the mountaintop that receives a signal and repeats it. Okay, so I'm using my 5 watt radio. I'm talking to the repeater up there. The repeater is a 200 watt repeater. okay, a transmitter. So I'm talking at 5 watts, and I'm talking to somebody, I can talk to somebody in Lehigh off of a 5 watt. Actually, I can turn it down low if I can see the repeater, right? So I'm talking 1 watt into the mountaintop, and that mountaintop repeater is retransmitting that signal, so I can talk to people in Lehigh.
The reason why I ask is that I'm in an ATV group. And when we get out in the middle of nowhere, we struggle trying to hear each other. And often it's because the guy's just over on the other side of the ridge. We're talking simplex.
Right. So, bigger antenna, having a repeater set up. There's a thing called crossband repeat where you can take a radio and transmit on one frequency and it retransmits it out on another frequency. So everybody would use, like if you're if you have a dual band radio, you're transmitting on the 400 megahertz band, and the crossband repeat will transmit on the 2 meter, retransmit that on the 2 meter. So it's just like a repeater on the mountaintop. And you can set that at a location where people can have a line of sight on both sides of the mountain, and it will go ahead and repeat that.
With ATVs, there's nothing stable. Everybody's moving or wanting.
Right. It has its limitations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it after, yeah.
Yeah. There's ways around stuff, but a lot of the clubs, we have to understand the limitation of what radio signals can do. And the frequency that we're using on the HTs, the 2 meter and the 1.25 meter and the 70 centimeter, they typically don't do a good job of going over mountains, over large hills. Sometimes they can, okay? If you get 6 meter or 10 meter communications, that tends to propagate a little bit better. It uses ground wave, but that's another discussion, okay? Okay, so we want to be able to have the opportunity to change the power level because that's what the FCC wants us to do, and we want to be good ham radio citizens. So it turns out it's very easy to do. If you look at your radio, at your keypad, there's a bunch of smaller letters by each of the numbers. As a matter of fact, on the Baofeng, if you look at number 2, it's a TXP. Okay, so that's it gives you a shortcut of how to get into the menu and go to the transmit power location to change the power. So what you do, and as you have your radio, if you have a Baofeng, do what I'm doing. And by the way, you can be in either VFO or channel mode, doesn't matter. You push the menu button is the first thing that you do. Then you push the up arrow until you get to the TXP option, which is the second option. This is why it shows TXP right next to the number 2. That is menu option 2. Menu option 1 is, what does that say? Squelch, yeah. So you go to the TX, then you push menu again, and what'll happen is this arrow, when you're in menu, this arrow will be up on band A. When you push menu again, that arrow comes down to the second line, okay? And then there's the option of what you want to do. So then you click on the up arrow to change to whatever value you want, high, low, in the case of Baofeng. Some radios have 4 power levels. Some radios have 3 power levels. Some radios have 2 power levels, okay? The Baofeng has 2 power levels, so it'll either say high or low. It does have 3. Oh, excellent.
Not on most of them.
UV5R, okay.
Yeah, this is a 5R, this is good too.
I have 3.
Okay,
Some of them have.
Power on low.
say again?
Line off low.
Personally, when I program my radio, I put all of the channels on low power. I try that first. If that doesn't work, then I put it on high. Because it's a very quick change, okay? Now, there is not an HT Gestapo to go around and look at your, if you just transmit on high, off to the chokey with you, that's not gonna happen, okay? Okay, so that's the Baofeng. You change the radio, then you push menu, and then exit. Very, very simple. On the VX-6, this is a little bit trickier. This is where the FW comes in. You have to push FW, and then immediately you have to push the little atom-looking button there below, to the left of the number 7. And as you can see right above there, there's a TX-PO, so that's transmit power. Okay. And so when you do a TXPO, when you first push FW, you immediately push the TXPO or that atom button, and then the display will show the power level that it was changed to. If you want to change it again, you do the FW atom again, FW atom. If you time it right, you can do FW atom and then turn the upper dial, and then that'll cycle through them. But you got to be fast. Yeah. To me, it's easier just to say, just use the atom button until you become very familiar with your radio and you know the quirks of it, and then you do it.
How many settings?
I think there's 4 on the VX-6, but I think, okay, I'm not sure. I think there's a low, mid, 1, mid 2, and then high. But
Different radios will have.
it doesn't matter.
levels.
Yeah,
On like Kenwood, it has extra low, low, and high.
yeah.
Extra low is like half a watt or something like that. Or I think extra low is like a quarter of a watt, or an eighth of a watt, or something really low. And then low is like 1 watt and high is that.
And also, like on the VX-6, it's a tri-bander. So the low on the 220 is different from the low on the 2 meter or the 70 centimeter. Okay, so it's just whatever. The manual is your friend. You just take a look at the manual, and the very back where the specifications, it'll tell you the power levels of all the bands. Okay, on the dual band, it's very simple. They're always the same. Now for the VX-6, the 220 band, the low is 300 milliwatts. Okay, and that's you know how much 300 milliwatts is? It's not a whole lot. And I'm in Murray by Wheeler Farm, and I'm hitting the Murray repeater just fine. 300 milliwatts. It just blows me away. Okay, for the FT-60, we also use the FW key again. That's going to be our first key that we're going to do. And then if you look at the number 3 button, there's a TXPO there. So you guessed it, FW, TXPO. But the FT-60 is really, really nice to you because it stays on the power level. And you use the top dial to decide what power level you want to do it. It doesn't change back immediately. So it's very, very forgiving. Once you find the power level that you're looking for, you just hit the transmit button. And
stand for?
frequency right. But don't worry about it because it's only used one time to write the frequency, okay? The rest of the time it's used to get into these submenus, okay? So incidentally, here's a clue. You notice all of the, I'll do it here so everybody can see. You notice all of the numbers, they have some menu item on top of it, right? For the number 1, it's squelch type. For the number 2 is code. 3 is TXPO. 4 repeater, etc. If I change the transmit power by doing the FW and then number 3, how do you think I can change the squelch type. If I need to change the squelch type, exactly, do the same thing, FW1, and then you just change the option. So once you find out how to change something, on these radios, then it's the same for everything else. If I want to change the PL tone to a repeater, I can hit that FW and then hit the number 2 for code. Okay, and that's the code that I would use, the CTCSS code that we're going to talk about later on what that is. But the point is, if you know how to do it with one menu item, you can do it with all of them. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the FT-60. Okay, we're done with that. Now, the last one was the TYT. Again, with the TYT, with any radio that you have multiple bands, you have to choose the band that you want to deal with. Okay, if you're looking at band A and the arrow is pointing to band B, when you hit menu, whatever you do in that menu is going to take effect on band B. Okay, it will not touch band A. So you need to make sure that that arrow is pointing to the right band that you want to work with. So you choose the band, then you push menu to get into the menu structure. Then you move your up arrow until you get to the TXP option, which is 1, 2, or 3, something real low. When you push the menu again, then it will, the indicator will move to the second line. When you get into the menu structure of the TYT, even though you're looking at 3 bands, as soon as you get into the menu structure, it'll have the name of the menu item and then the value right below it. So it turns to a 2-line display, okay? So when you push menu again, the indicator will move to the second line, and then you use your up arrow to decide what power you want to use. When you find the power that you want, then you hit menu again and then click exit. So there's the exit button right down here in the corner. Yes, someone had a question? Okay.
So one point, it is memory or menu setting number 2, and on the keypad, it's labeled power. So the number 2 there is power.
Consequently,
It's not a bad
one is SQL. Okay, so the squelch. Some radios have a squelch button or a dial. Some of them are defined in the menu structure. So this one here does not have a squelch button or a dial. You have to adjust the squelch in menu. Okay. And I've been thinking, yes.
Real quick, you want to tell people what squelch actually is? You might be confused on that.
Okay, so back in the dawn of time, when the first Neanderthal radio operator invented the radio, okay, there was this radio sound that you could hear. It looks like it sounds like. Okay, it was it's listening to that frequency, and that's a bugger to listen to all day long. So they invented a thing called squelch, and what that does is it cuts out that noise and to a certain level. So in other words, when you're transmitting on your HT, it's transmitting information on a particular frequency. Okay, that frequency has a certain amplitude. Okay, it has different strengths of when it comes into the radio. Okay, the squelch controls how powerful that RF signal is for you to listen to it. If I have a squelch value of 1, that means there's very, very little squelch on there, which means that I'm going to not only hear the transmission, but more than likely I'm going to hear a bunch of other things that are able to go beyond the noise level of where that squelch level is set at. Is there anybody else who can help me out with this? Yes,
I think of it as kind of the sensitivity of the receiver. You set that noise floor that it will reject the noise floor below that squelch setting. And so that noise, those other things that you're not trying to listen to, don't activate the receiver and come out through your speaker.
So it's like a hearing aid, but it will.
No, because it's not going to amplify anything. What it's doing is setting the threshold of how much signal it has to receive before it'll pass it through the audio. Okay.
if your hearing aid is able to turn
Sometimes they
on
turn on.
when the volume is at a certain level, when someone's talking to you, and only then your hearing aid turns on, that would be as well.
Yeah, that's what it does as well. And the risk is if you set that squelch too high, you're gonna miss things because it's not gonna activate the receiver on a weak signal that you're trying to receive that's above the noise floor, but below what you're getting as well. So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. So sometimes, yes, go ahead.
So if you're trying to hear a very weak signal, you want to put up a little noise, and you turn the swell down, and you can hear those little weak signals popping above the noise, but you kind of get them above. And you block the noise, when you get stronger signal, just to turn the swell up.
And many radios have a feature or a button on them that you can turn off the squelch to monitor something. You know, momentarily, just, you know, while you're holding it in. So if you think somebody's out there that you're not hearing, you can open the squelch. You open the squelch and it lowers that all the way down, and that way anything will come in, including noise. But that hiss that you hear is just noise, it's just random radio signals that your radio doesn't really decode, but hear them.
Thank you. Okay, on the 350, it's real similar. You get into the menu, you go to the transmit power option, you push menu again, which is identical to the Baofeng, and you decide what power you want, and then you push menu to lock it in. And when you push menu again, that arrow that is pointing to the value will go back to the option, and then you push exit to get out of the menu structure. Okay.
I push that up arrow on mine, I can't get it to over that TXP.
Okay, let's take a look here. Menu. Yeah, there it is. Here, let me exit. So I'm gonna have you push the button, push menu. Okay, now push the up arrow. See, takes you to transmit. And then
It's like blank.
okay.
Effective radio for operator.
Okay, so getting into the menu, like I was saying, I was debating on whether or not to talk about getting into the menu before we talked about changing the transmit power, because you have to get into the menu to change the transmit power on most radios. Okay, so I put it here because now it'll be old hat to you. It'll be like, I already know this. So to get into the menu, you push menu, you push the up arrow until you get to the option that you want to change. Then you push menu again. The indicator line will go from the band A to pointing to the band B. And then it'll also have the value that you change. And so in the case of power, high, low, in the case of squelch, in the case of CTCSS, in the case of anything, you change the option the way you want it. When you're done, then you click menu again and click exit, which is identical to the 350.
Save, or you hit the TTT to save. On the Baofeng.
No, you can hit menu. You hit menu to bring it up, and that saves it. And then you hit exit. I'm sorry?
This one doesn't have an exit.
What model is that?
It's the tri-band.
It's okay. So again,
I think I hit ETD.
okay, that's very possible. Some radios require you to like the FT-60, I can hit the transmit key to lock that menu option in, okay?
Okay.
So whatever your radio requires. Okay, for the VX-6, which is another radio that we use here in the club, again, you hit the FW, that gets you into whatever menu, get into the menu. Well, actually, you hit the FW and then hit the number 0, which is set. When you click on the set button, that gets you into the entire menu structure. And then you use the lower dial to go to whatever menu option you're looking for. And there's a whole bunch of them, okay? When you find the one that you want, then you go ahead and push the transmit button. And that locks it in. Same thing for the FT-60. Hit the FW, then you immediately hit the set, which is 0. Then you click on the upper dial. You turn the upper dial to go to the menu option that you want to go to. When you get to where you want, then you hit the FW, and that will enable you to change the option to whatever you want. When you're done, when you found the option, then you hit transmit, okay? And on the 350, again, you have to, it's band dependent. You got to make sure you understand this. It's band dependent. If I'm on the 3rd band, if that arrow is pointing on the very bottom one, whatever I do hereafter only refers to that particular band, okay? So you push menu, you push the up arrow or down arrow to go to the menu option, then you hit menu again, and that'll move that arrow to the 2nd line. You then change it to the desired value, then you push menu and exit. You know, that's a TYT. That the same thing is true with the with the Baofeng. They have to do the very same steps. Okay. Let the games begin. We're going to talk about repeater use, and there's a few things that we need to understand when we're talking about repeaters. We need to understand 2 things that are required for the repeater to deal with, okay? So if the repeater has to deal with 2 things, our HTs have to deal with the same 2 things, because if they are not the same, you are not going to have that repeater repeat the signal, okay? And that is the frequency offset and the PL tone. And we're going to talk about each one of them. First, the frequency offset. For the 2-meter band, the frequency offset, or the difference between the transmit and receive frequency, is 600 kilohertz, okay? The problem with the 2-meter band is it could either be a positive offset or a negative offset, and it depends on the part of the band that is controlled. If I'm in 146.78, that could be a negative offset, and I could be 144.45, that could be a positive offset, okay? So it's important that you know what offset that repeater is looking for. As a matter of fact, when you go to the internet and you go to the repeaters in Utah, like going to the UHF Society webpage, it lists all the repeaters, and it tells you on the 2-meter band, actually tells you on all the bands, what the offset is, okay? It makes a difference, because if the repeater is looking for a positive offset and you programmed your radio to do a negative offset, you ain't going to talk to the repeater, okay? Yes?
So, just to be clear, the offset is the difference between the input and the output.
Correct.
Got 2 frequencies, and they are separated by so many.
Yes. Yep. And we're going to get a little more detail into that. On the 220 band, the offset is 1.6 megahertz. And thank goodness, it's always negative offset. Okay. On the radio, it looks like 1.6 megahertz. And the reason why I put what it looks like on the radio is because when you're dealing with 600 kilohertz, people refer to it as 600 kilohertz, but it's 0.6 megahertz. Okay, so the radio will not give you an option to put kilohertz in there. Everything is in megahertz. So it's 0.6 megahertz, which is 600 kilohertz. Metric system 101. And then for the 70 centimeter band, the offset frequency split is 5 megahertz, and it's always negative. Okay, so negative to what? Positive to what? And here's the key right here. The offset is in relation to the receive frequency that you see on your radio. Okay, so for the, as a matter of fact, I have an example here. For the Murray Amateur Radio Club, when you turn it on, when you're looking at it at the frequency, you're looking at 223.96. Okay, that is the receive frequency. That is the frequency that the repeater is transmitting to my radio. Okay, the repeater is not listening, however, to 223.96. Its receive is configured as 222.360. Okay, so if you take 223.96 minus 1.6, what do you get? 222.360. Okay. And so you need to understand that anytime we're talking about offset, it's in relation to the receive frequency that we're dealing with. Okay. Now, I will say that at the end of this presentation, there's a QR code that you can download the entire presentation. And now I get people looking at me, why didn't you tell me this earlier? And I did that for a reason, because for me, I learn a lot more if I write it down. Okay, so anyway, so that's very important to understand. Now let's talk about PL tone. The world is full of PL tones. You buy a FRS radio, and on the bubble pack it says this radio has 128 secret privacy tones that you can, privacy codes that you can use. They're just referring to a PL tone. A PL tone, sometimes referred to as a privacy tone, is used to tell the repeater to repeat the accompanying RF signal that he's receiving. So if I'm talking to a repeater and the repeater requires a tone, on the proper frequency, the repeater will only repeat my audio on 144.54 megahertz if he can hear that sub-audible tone. Okay, if that PL tone is not part of the signal that I'm transmitting, guess what? The repeater will not repeat. Okay, so this is the thing that will get people when they buy their 12-pack of Baofengs on Amazon and they think they're all ready for the earthquake. They're just going to turn on their ham radio and they're going to talk to anybody they want to. Wrong. They have to understand repeaters. They have to understand offsets. They have to understand PL codes. Hey, yes, sir.
What a great idea. So the Draper Association is having their net call. And they said it was on frequency 447.100 with a PL tone of 100.
Yep.
So what do I have to do to my radio?
You are going to figure that out later on. Okay.
$5.
Throw in the candy.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one thing you probably want to know is the proper term for these tones is CTCSS. So a lot of times when you're looking at repeaters, it won't say a PL, it will say CTCSS tone. It's the same thing.
It gets worse than that.
Oh, I know.
It's radio dependent. Okay. So the Baofeng refers to it differently as the TYT, which refers to it differently as the Yaesu. Okay. So, but it's the same thing. Whatever it's called, the CTCSS or the CDC for this here. Yes,
The other thing that gets confused is that your radio may want, or may have an option to only unsquelched if it receives that tone as well.
Yeah.
So not just the repeater might ignore you, but your radio itself might ignore signals that don't have that tone.
Well, and that's what we need to understand in a couple of slides. We're going to talk about the repeater may be sending out his own tone to open up your squelch. And if your radio does not receive that tone, you're not going to hear it. Okay, yes, sir.
When you're transmitting, is that PL tone continuous line of transmission? Yeah, I built it, home generator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My original radio didn't have.
The thing that I am on the, okay, so not to complicate things, but this is ham radio. We have analog PL tones. As a matter of fact, I think that's on the next one there. Yeah. We have analog PL tones and we have digital tones. And digital really isn't a tone. It's a series of, it's a digital code that gets sent out. And I do not know if that is a continuous stream. Okay. I do know on the analog side, it is continuous. Okay. So the PL tone itself is, like I said, is either an analog sub-audible, and sub-audible is something that you can't hear, right? And I went to a test tone generator a couple days ago, and I'm going to see how my hearing is. And once it gets to about 100 hertz, if nothing else is there, I can just barely hear it. Yes.
So there are some repeaters that only care to hear that tone initially when you first start transmitting. And I have encountered situations where someone will like key up right as another person finishes talking, and the repeater will continue to repeat that, even if they're not sending the tone.
How do you know they're not sending the tone?
Because we figured that out later when sometimes
Okay.
it didn't work for them. It only worked if they followed.
So they didn't have their PL tone set.
They did not have the PL tone. So user or operator A had the PL tone set, operator B did not, right?
Right.
And if operator A keys up, the repeater starts repeating. And then as soon as they drop, operator B keys up, like
Sure.
within a fraction of a second, the repeater would continue to work and repeat that, even though he wasn't setting a tone. But if operator A unkeyed and operator B waited a second or two,
He couldn't do it.
then he keyed up, the repeater ignored it.
Right.
Because he
So
wasn't setting a tone. So just be aware of that can happen sometimes.
we won't have, if you understand PL tones, if you program your radio by what the frequency coordinator says for the Murray Amateur Radio Club, we're at 22396. That's the receive. PL tone is 103.5 hertz. Okay. And for extra credit, I had to go to the frequency coordinator to get the frequency, but I was able to choose the PL tone. Why did I choose 103.5?
Because you like that radio station.
Because 103.5 is my radio station. That is the only reason why I did 103.5. The dirty little secrets you'll learn, right? Okay, so here's the thing. You must set the PL tone in the menu for either the transmit, and it's usually 90% of the time, you just have to worry about the transmit or receive or both. It depends on the repeater, okay? You have to know what that is. There is no wiggle room on that, other than these little quirks that you may or may not see ever in your life.
If you're configured correctly, it won't ever bother you. But if you're trying to talk to somebody and their radio is not configured correctly, that can be a reason why. And
Yeah.
if you just tell them, hey, make sure your PL tone is set correct.
Yep. Yes, sir.
How do you find out what the repeater is using?
You go to, let me,
It's on DHF Society.
DHF Society puts out a book every year. If you remember, you get it free, and they're all in for Utah.
Well, you can also go to their website. It's on their website as well.
What's the initials again?
Utah.
Let me get to it.
TH-350. Dot. Is it? I think it's .org.
For the repeater book, there's an app on your phone.
Yeah, or repeater book. Have it.
It's utahvhfs.org. Yeah, let me move this over. Utah VHF S standing for society, they're the VHF Society.org. And if you go to the repeater list, you click on that, and it will take you through all the repeaters that are in Utah. So there's the 6 meter. Yay, we have 3 repeaters. A lot of 2 meter, but you notice, let me get down here.
Murray's not in there.
Why not? We didn't pay our dues.
No, this is the 2 meter section of it. There's a section of it where
You can see that there's a whole lot of 2 meter stuff, and then there's even frequencies with a positive offset. Okay, so that makes a difference, positive or negative. And when you get down to the 1.25, and here is ours, 22396 negative offset. You'll notice all of these are negative offset. We are Murray and 7MROI. By the way, if you want to know about the repeater, you click on that little button right there, and it'll come up and it'll tell you the location, the information about it, where we're located at, the sponsor, and our call sign, and there you go.
Show them where the PO phone is.
And there's the PO tone right there.
Which is CTCSS.
Yeah, CTCSS.
CTCSS stands for continuous tone carrier, system.
Sense. I think there's a sense in there, but anyway,
Sense system or carrier system.
don't worry about it.
That's the deal.
Yes. Okay, so let's,
Scroll that down. There's a link down there on the bottom that will take you to our repeater page. And you can actually see a picture of the repeater there.
on your information there. And it shows a positive number for your longitude. Put it on the other side of the world.
Yeah, the longitude's wrong.
this is a common thing though. They always forget the negative 111.
Yeah.
It's always positive, and that's in tip 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But repeater book has it right.
Okay. So, okay, let me get back to presentation. Okay, so the menu will display receive, and then whatever that radio refers to is the CTCSS tone. In some radios, it's CTC, and in the TYT, it's CDC, the Center for Disease Control. But that's what it is. Yes.
Most of the time, we're going to want the CTCSS.
Yes. Like I said, 90% of the repeaters, as a matter of fact, I do not know of a repeater in Utah that sends that out, but they do. I know in Minneapolis, when I go there, they're there. I'm a member of the couple clubs in New York. They have repeaters that are like that all over the US. That's a possibility. Yes.
But if the repeater is sending that out, your radio will probably still receive it, because if your radio hasn't been set for receive, it's going to receive all.
If it's set to if it's turned off, then you might hear it.
You should still hear it, because if it's turned off, you're receiving all. If it's turned on, you're only receiving if it hears the stuff out of the phone.
I know that works with the FRS radios. I'm not going to bet my job that it works with the ham radio. Okay, it probably will. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, you may hear things you don't want to hear.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So how do you know whether
The radio, the information will say for Utah, you just know that that's what you have to do for the transmit. That's always what the radio, the repeater wants to hear. Okay. If there is if it's different, then it'll tell you transmit and receive. Now, a lot of times people, whether or not it's legal or not, I'm not the FCC and I don't care. But people will program their simplex frequencies using PL tones to radios, and some organizations use both transmit and receive, because if you're not on that transmit and receive, and by the way, the transmit CTCS can be different from the receive CTCSS, okay? They don't have to be the same. They can be sending different codes. And some organizations do that just so that it's hard for people to listen in on their conversation, okay? Whether that's legal or not, I don't care. That's not what this class is about. The technology is there. Some people use it, okay? If it's digital, then more than likely it'll say DCS, okay? But it'll be obvious whether it's a CTCS, because it'll always start with the letter C. And if it's digital, it'll always start with the letter D, okay?
And when you're looking at it in the menu, the CTCSS tones will have a decimal point in them, the digital ones will not.
They'll have a north and an N or an I, which is kind of, we're not even going to get into that. Don't worry about it. They will have numbers, and then they will have a letter at the end. Okay. The default letter is N as in November. Okay. So the MARC repeater uses 22396. So you set your transmit on you program your radio to transmit on 22236 with the transmit CTCSS at 103.5. And then you'll be able to talk to the repeater. That repeater will then retransmit your signal. The repeater then transmits on 22396, which is what you're receiving. This is why you see the 22396, which is the frequency your radio receives it on, and every other radio that will receive that on. This is why on our HTs or mobile radios, we show the receive frequency and not the transmit frequency of the repeater. You kind of have to know both, though, if you're going to program a repeater into your radio, okay? So this sometimes is a concept that's difficult to understand until you program a few repeaters in and you start using it. Can you imagine the people who bought their 12-pack on Amazon think they're going to
They don't work, right?
yeah, exactly. They have zero experience with ham radio, and so it's just wasted money. So okay,
Real quick,
yes.
Make sure I understand this right. So I'm looking at the Draper ham radio repeater. And the output frequency was the 447.1. And then the input frequency was 442.1.
Right.
So an offset of negative 500. So are those the two frequencies that?
Yes, yes. And it's in relation to the repeater. Okay, so read that first sentence that you gave.
The 447.1?
What's the output frequency?
442.1.
442.1. That is what he's transmitting on, and that's what
It's the other way around.
The output is 447.1.
447.1.
Output of the repeater.
Yes, that is from the repeater.
And the input is 442.1.
That's what you're transmitting on.
Okay.
So your transmit is the 442, and your receive is the 447.
On the radio, does it matter which one goes on the top and which one goes on the bottom?
It's a moot point when we program it in. Okay.
So as long as those two numbers are in there,
Yes,
when I transmit, it'll.
and we're gonna learn how to do that right now.
As long as you got the CTCSS code.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so adding VFO frequencies and settings. Notice I say and settings because it's more than just the frequency, because we have the PL tone we have to deal with and the offset. Okay, so you can either program your HT via the keypad, which is a good thing to do. You can program your radio via a computer. That's kind of handy if you have hundreds of frequencies to use. But it's always a good thing to know how to do it manually, because guess what? You're not always going to have your computer with you. And if you are relying on your computer and you need to change the frequency real quick to another frequency, whether or not you program it into a channel is a moot point. You're in VFO mode. You want to talk to somebody simplex. They'll say, quickly, turn your radio to 14652. Okay. What do I do? Okay. So if you do it manually on the keypad, know how to do that. And I tell all the club members this: anytime I buy a new radio, whether it's an HT or a mobile radio, guess what I do? Even though I have the software to program it in, I will manually program at least 100 channels into the radio manually, at least. And it takes me a couple hours. I don't care how long it takes. I want it to be muscle memory. Okay. Why? Because this is a small sample of the radios that I have. Okay. And because I use so many different types of radios, if I don't do that, then I'm toast out in the field. But right now, I can take my FT2D and I can do everything that we've talked about here, because I programmed it so many times manually. Same thing with the TYT, same thing with any of the radios that I have. And I suggest you guys do the same, because that's the only way to, well,
Repetition brings conviction.
yes, absolutely. And for me, that's how I learn. And because I'm the dumbest person in the room, it may only take you 3 channels to really get it. Okay, I understand. I'm a slow learner. So anyway, that's what I do. So let's figure this out. Step 1 is always to know the transmit and receive frequency that you're going to use if you're going to program a repeater in there, and the PL tone. If you don't have that information, then there's actually ways. If you don't know what the PL tone is, you can have the radio listen for the PL tone when someone else is transmitting, and you can figure that out, but that's in the advanced class. Okay. For this class, find out what PL tone you're on, find out what the transmit and receive frequency is. And if you know what the transmit and receive frequency is, then you also know what the offset is. Okay. And you also know which direction the offset is. Then you set your HT in VFO mode. You always do this in VFO mode. Okay. You cannot do this in channel mode. The radio will not let you. You have to be in VFO mode. Program the receive frequency of the repeater, or the transmit and receive frequency if you're programming a simplex frequency. Simplex, we use the same frequency for both of them. Okay. Then you go into the menu and program the transmit or receive, or both PL tone. In Utah, it's always going to be transmit CTCSS, okay, or transmit DCS. I know of 2 repeaters in Utah that use digital codes. Okay, the rest of them are all analog. Okay, yes, sir.
Okay, so I think I've done that already. How do I save that into the radio as a channel?
Yeah, yeah. Hang tight. We'll get there. We'll get there. I love it. Yes. Okay. Step 5. And here's a little wrench that they put into the works. Some radios have what's called an automatic repeater offset. So the Yaesus, the ICOMs, the Kenwoods, those radios will have an automatic repeater offset, so you don't have to worry about that part. For the rest of us, if you're using a Baofeng, the TYT, they require that you program the different frequencies in. Okay. But once you do it a couple times, it becomes old habit. And if you do it 100 times, then it'll be muscle memory. And then once you have everything in VFO, then you save that configuration into a memory channel. And we're going to show you how to do that. Okay. So adding a new channel on your Baofeng. After you've set up your VFO with the PL tone, then and also the transmit and well, not yet for the Baofeng. You push the memory. You go to memory option 27, which is mem channel. Then you push menu again, and it'll drop that arrow down to the second line. And then you push the up arrow or down arrow to change the channel number until you find an available channel that's available. So how do you know what is available? Well, turns out on the Baofeng, if you see CH dash then some channel number, then that channel spot is already used. If you click on the up arrow, down arrow, and you come to a blank and then a channel number, you can use that channel number to save that all of that stuff, that VFO information into that channel slot. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to determine what channel to do this on. And if I were you, I would have a spreadsheet that keeps track of where you want to go. Okay, once you found the desired empty channel, then you hit the menu button again. And what will happen is the display will change to put a CH in front of that channel number. Okay, did it work?
It worked.
Beautiful. When
Program using channel 45.
nice. That's going to mess with your brain in a little while, but just know that, was it Sandy? Draper? Draper is channel 45. Okay. And I'm going to show you, yes, sir.
So then, real quick, by changing from VF mode to channel mode, change the channel mode, I can hit 45 and it'll take it directly there. 045. Yeah.
Okay. So when you exit, when you click on the exit, you're still in VFO mode. Okay. So when you exit, it takes you back to VFO mode. So be aware of that. For the VX-6, it actually is a lot easier. You program all of your frequency, your PL tone, and any repeater offset in VFO mode. Then you hit the FW key for 1 second. Okay, that will then you release, and then within 5 seconds of releasing the FW key, you turn the dial knob to take you to whatever channel you want to use. And then if you see the channel number is blinking, that means that the channel number has no data on it, which is different from the Baofeng. The Baofeng won't have anything there. On the Yaesus, the channel number will blink, and then you hit FW one more time to store the frequency. Okay, and then it takes you back to the VFO mode. So it's very simple. For the FT-60, it's almost identical. You do everything in the VFO mode. You push the FW key for 1 second. Within 10 seconds of releasing the FW key, you do the lower dial. Now, okay, so the FT-60 and the VX-6, they have 1,000 channels. Do I want to, if I wanted to go to 754, that's going to be an awful long time, right? So one thing that these radios will do is automatically it will take you to the next available option, okay? But you can buck the system, and there's a way of dealing with that, and that is if you hit the band key, it'll increase your channel by 100. So 123, 223, 323, 423, 523. If I was on 023 at the very beginning, it adds 100. So it's very easy to get to the 700s, and then you go up from there. Okay, so it makes it so it doesn't require you to spend 3 hours turning the dial to get it to channel 700. Okay. And any radio that has a lot of memory channels, has some mechanism to do that, okay? And as far as the 350 go, again, you have to choose the band that you're using. Make sure you're in VFO mode. Make sure you program your VFO mode the way, that particular band the way you want it. You go to your, and in this case, I'm actually going to take you through, since this is kind of a club radio that we've been using, I'm actually taking you detail on what you need to do. So you go in and you go to option 14, which is receive, which we don't have to worry about it. So we want transmit. There's the CDC, which is the CTCSS or the PL tone. And then you change it to whatever you want. And here's an actual going through each of this stuff. After you hit the menu, you go to option 15, which is transmit CDC. Once you get there, then you hit menu again. That arrow will take you down to the second screen or the second line, and it'll say off. And then what do? Well, you go ahead and you cycle through the PL tone types by pushing the VM button. Pushing the VM button will cycle you through analog, digital, or off. Okay, so if it's an analog, then it'll have something that ends in hertz. Anything that ends in hertz, you know that it's an analog PL tone. If it's a digital, it'll have some number with the letter N. Okay, that's if it's a DCS code. In our example, we're going to turn the middle dial to 127.3. Once we have the proper transmit CTCS tone, then we're going to hit the enter button, and then we're going to go to after we hit enter, we are then back into the menu. You hit the up arrow because we want to go to option 26, which is the offset direction. We have to tell this radio the offset direction. It does not understand it automatically. And so once you've done this before, once you're in menu, then you hit menu. You can see the arrow goes down to the actual option that we can change. Then you push the up arrow to change it between plus or negative. And if it's simplex, then you do 0. And you push the enter button to accept. And then you have to go to menu 27 for difference. This is the offset. So we just did the PL tone. Now we're going to do the offset. We have to tell it that it's a 600 kilohertz because 140 whatever is a 2 meter band. And I know that the 2 meter is always 600 kilohertz, 0.6 megahertz. So I have to change it to 0.6, and you just type in 0 until the cursor goes over to on the right-hand side of the period. Then that is your cue to hit the number 6, and then hit 0, 0, 0. Then you hit enter, and then get out of menu. So using the offset menu item 27 only takes effect if the offset direction is set to plus or minus. If it's set to 0, then the offset frequency is a moot point. You can have it set to 5 megahertz, but if you're telling the radio not to use the offset, then it doesn't matter what that option is, okay? So just make a note of that. And then you push the exit to get out of there, and you hold the menu button until the channel number flashes. Then you do the up arrow or down arrow to get to the proper flashing menu channel number that you want. When you find that, you push the enter key, and the next thing to do is to name the channel. Some radios, like the TYT, the Baofengs, and most Chinese radios will not allow you to name the channel. When you're done, you will have the frequency and the channel number. You have to go into the computer to actually assign a name to it. There are some radios, like the Yaesu radios, the Icon radios, the Kenwoods, where you can actually put the name from the keypad, okay? So, because we're dealing with the TYT, we have to go into the computer to do that. So you are now in control of your radio. You know how to get into the memory area, which is where everything is done, and you can change any menu option at will. There's an included manual. Go over the manual and see what the memory options are. Google the things that you don't understand. Going to YouTube is a great resource to learn about your radio. Okay, every manufacturer has, you go to the TYT, Google or do a search on YouTube for TYT 350, and there's all kinds of videos on people telling you how to program the radio and stuff, okay? But if you want to learn, if you want to know the best way of learning how to use your radio, does that sound like a good question to answer right now? How would you like to learn the best way to learn your radio? Well,
And use your radio.
the best method is to find a club mentor, and we will work with you, and we will all tell you that in order to really love your radio is to use your radio, okay? And do different things with it. Go to Utah SAG. If you're not a ham radio operator yet, then get your license and keep coming to these classes, and we'll help you get that. But you are in control. You can you can do it. And most importantly, the reason why we do this is to have fun. And I tell you what, I absolutely love ham radio. Every time I bring up the word ham radio with my wife, she just shakes her head. But she's a sweetheart because she allows me to continue on. Okay, questions? Here's the QR code. You can scan that. You can download this presentation and all the presentations that I have. And I have a lot of presentations on that link.
Questions. The thing I would throw out there is, where do you want to go next? If you are here and you're new or you're unfamiliar with some things, what do you want to do next? We'll put together something to help you. We'll do that as one of our basic topics one month. So throw it out on our net on Sunday night as your traffic, or on the emails that you receive, or your week. Let us know. We might put something together. Find an expert. Not always Dan. Usually is, but not always.
Yes, sir.
For me, actually, using the radio would be very helpful. Like, go out and contact with your.
Yep. So an idea is to get a hold of people who are also hammers. To us hammers, everything is an L in the world, right? You've heard of that, right? Okay, so find another hammer, and I see a whole bunch of them in here. Say, hey, let's talk on the radio on Friday at 5 p.m. or get a time when you can get on the repeater and start, you have the Draper repeater programmed in. We all have Draper in our radios. We can go in and talk to you. And that's the key, is getting on the radio, start pushing that little PTT button, and just acting like you're sitting in front of the person talking, okay? The only difference is you just have a radio to talk to, And one thing that'll help you, just for an idea, something that I have to do, because I always talk loud. When I talk on the radio, I talk like this. I don't talk right into the radio. I talk on the side. And so that may help your modulation. That may help people on the other side hearing you. This is the one thing about talking on the radio. You don't know how you're coming in on the other side, right? You can't hear yourself. So find out, from people, how does this sound? Try different things, try different power levels. Okay, now that you know how to change the power, even though you don't need to change the power, get in the practice of going into the menu and changing stuff, okay? Don't get too crazy, because if you change the PL tone, then you can't talk the repeater anymore, right? So, anyway, the sky's the limit now, you know, so, any questions?
Thank you.